Welcome to the Freedom Frequency. I'm Laura. I'm a consciousness guide and multidimensional channel, pinpointing where your soul is inviting you to fully embody its passion and stretch into your boldest edge with grace, certainty, and unstoppable momentum.
And I'm Anna Jones, the Bliss Facilitator. I help entrepreneurs find freedom in all areas of their life so they can finally have a life that feels as good as it looks.
We created this podcast series to explore the invisible prisons we create and how to break free by tuning into the vibrations of limitless living, bold choices, and true freedom.
We're here to share the tools, stories, and mindsets that have helped us break free and create a life we truly love in hopes that they will serve you too.
To us, freedom isn't a goal, it's our natural state.
Join us on this journey of reclaiming and redefining freedom,
so you can turn up your frequency and step into your own definition of freedom.
Welcome to the Freedom Frequency.
Welcome back to episode 3 of the Freedom Frequency. Today we're going to be talking about what does freedom in relationships mean? So I'm going to hand this over to Anna and let her start with this topic because this was kind of lighting a fire for her.
Yeah. So in the past episode, Laura mentioned something. If you haven't listened to it, go ahead and listen to it. It's actually really good. All the episodes are really good. But she was talking about how Jay Shetty and his wife have this annual, I guess, like meeting or conversation, and they decide whether or not they still want to be married to each other. And I think that that is a really great idea, like to actually have a moment and sit down and be like, how are you feeling? Well, how, what's going on? And obviously I'm not there. I don't know what they talk about, but I always tell my boyfriend, like, this is something that I intend to bring into our relationship all the time. And I told him from the beginning, I'm like, make no mistake, and not as a threat or like an ultimatum, but it's just like, make no mistake that, if at any point I feel like I am taken for granted, or like there's no reciprocity, or that I'm like basically like living with like a zombie, that I will speak up and I will say something about it. And eventually, if things don't align, if things don't, regroup, if we're not meant to grow together, then there will be this inevitable, very obvious, just space, gap between us. That's like, okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room. So I love this because going back to what freedom means to us, freedom to me is like being able to have these conversations, because we weren't taught this, right? It was like, until death do us part, and if you fuck with that, you are a sinner. At least that's where I came. Those were the rules where I came from. I was born and raised Catholic, and I was talking about a friend with this yesterday, and we were like, man, like religion, it just really can fuck you up, in terms of like control and beliefs and like all this stuff. If you're not somebody who believes in like expansion, or they don't teach you that at home, religion can really brainwash you into believing that you are worthless, that you are a piece of shit, that you are, everything that you do is like a sin. So yeah, just little disclaimer here: if you're super hyper religious, that's not an offense to you. Just really, this is the experience that I've had speaking to a lot of religious people. And I feel like this is something that we constantly just need to talk about, because not constantly, but it's okay to talk about it, right? Like, hey, do you like me? Are you like, what's going on? How do you feel that am I supporting you? Do you not feel supported? And I don't know about you, but for example, with my boyfriend, he's very quiet. And so often, sometimes he will say things, but I like to ask questions, because otherwise I don't really get a lot of responses. And there was a little bit of a pushback, because he was like, why are you, interrogating me? And I'm like, no, I just want to get to know you. So I think that we have different ways, different approaches of handling things. And for you, Laura, I mean, I know you have a lot to say about this. You've been in a relationship way longer than I have. So definitely you're married, I'm not. So that two, you know, different perspectives here.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things you brought up that I really liked, and one of them was this, and we talked about this a little bit. It came up briefly in our in episode 2 as well, around this idea that you are inevitably going to know, right? Like you're going to know. We talked about desire a lot last episode, and so it was like, well, you're going to know when that desire is meant to shift or when it is shifting into something else. And same thing with relationships. It's like, yes, if we're not meant to grow together, that will show itself. And I think that we can come from this place of fear and anxious attachment a lot of the time around like, well, where is this going? And, and instead it's like, just you're distracting yourself from being in presence with what is, right? Like be in presence with what is instead of gripping onto what you think needs to be in order for what? You to feel safe, you to feel complete, you to feel loved, you to feel desired, right? And so I think freedom also comes in there with recognizing that you get to fulfill those things within yourself and at the same time deeply appreciate and love and enjoy your partner and enjoy the relationship that you're in without there being a requirement to fulfill one another. It's kind of like, okay, like my relationship with source, my relationship with myself, my relationship with my desires, with my energy, that is my fuel. And you are my dessert, you're my dessert. Like, it's like, I don't require, but I deeply appreciate and desire this as well. And so I think freedom comes in there too, where there's less of an attachment. And that's the second part that comes up where you were talking about, asking your partner questions. And are you feeling supported and things like that? And I think that it's beautiful to kind of come together and be able to express. I can't remember where I heard this, but somebody was talking about, coming together and just basically saying, like, what is it that you need from me right now? What
Yeah.
is it that you desire from this space between us right now?
Mm.
Um, and people being able to express that openly. And I think that when we ask questions, that's good. But I think when we're repeatedly asking questions, it can also take away the responsibility of the other person to come into their own voice and be able to express that. And I think
Yeah.
it's really, there's a lot of freedom in detaching from having to know their needs. Like, they're an individual, they're responsible for meeting their own needs. If they desire support or guidance from you in order to kind of get them on a path to actualize that more or help support them in that, it is their responsibility to ask. And so I think it is a fine line sometimes, because we do want to support and love on our partners, and we want to take care of them in the way that they desire in terms of that dessert they're receiving from you, but not to do the work for them to enable them to continue being in a place where they're not growing.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's so much to unpack with relationships. I feel like relationships are probably like the most complex thing on this planet. And not because they necessarily have to be hard in nature. They just feel really challenging because of where we come from, what we're willing to do, how we're willing to see things differently. If we're willing to see things differently, are we living in a space from where we feel free, or are we living in contraction all the time? So if you're somebody who's looking expansion and your partner is always in contraction, it's just going to be really hard. It's going to feel really hard. It's going to feel like there's a lot of resistance, because because the other person isn't allowing, right? And it can feel very, very, what's the word? It can feel very threatening to them to even invite the possibility that they are no longer the person that they think that they have always been. So I think that there is just, oh my gosh, to me, um, like relationships, like conscious monogamous relationships, they just represent a lot of a lot of growth. Like, there is definitely, if you're willing to, open up and ask questions, and sometimes, like you said, step back and give the other person space and room to just share and be, it really is like a dance. And I have been noticing that. I mean, you know that I've been like through a really I went through a really rough patch at the very beginning of my relationship because I was in this space where I was like, it has to be this way. If it's not this way, then it's not what I want, then it's not good enough. And it was just like this like ridiculous, like Disney childish expectation that I had of my partner that it was never enough. And he could feel that. So that's the other thing. Never underestimate the energetic receptivity of your partner, because we can be like, smiling and like, but then inside we're like pissed off. They can sense that, especially if they're sensitive, which I know my boyfriend is. And so what I started doing was like you were saying, just coming back to myself and like being more attentive with me and making sure that I have my needs met instead of expecting my boyfriend to meet those needs. And what I've experienced now, coming from like a super anxious attachment, is like I've created and cultivated a safe attachment, which is nice. It feels good. It's when you like to be in company of the other person enjoys your company, you have the things you do with them and without them, and you really are like a good wine and cheese pairing, like you really contribute, and you add value to each other's lives, whether it's sitting on the couch and you're touching each other with like just the legs, just the feet, and you're each doing your thing, or one person's reading a book, the other person's reading whatever else, or watching TV or whatever. But it's like it doesn't feel dependent, it feels complementary.
Yeah, absolutely. Dependent versus complementary. And I think this is what comes up around trust, which is what you were talking about at the beginning with even organized religion, right? Like when we trust ourselves, when we trust that we are guided, when we trust our energy, when we trust our desires, and we allow those to lead, right? Then we always know that we are going to be in the fullest presence and the fullest embodiment of ourselves as we show up in whatever space. And so I think that sometimes people might think, well, when you do that, you can just kind of not commit to a longer term goal or a longer term connection in this relationship. And that's not the case, because my desire may be to continue to grow with this person, right? My desire may be to continue to grow. I may express myself differently in that. I may desire that our sitting on the couch with our feet touching and reading books is shifting, right? And that I desire more adventure and less of that. Does that match with their desire? Is that complementary? Or is one of us trying to fit ourselves in a box in order to accommodate the other person because their desire has shifted, and there's this gripping of, but we have to stay together because.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where the trust comes in, of I do trust my desires to lead me on a pathway of growth, and I trust theirs to lead them on a pathway of growth, and I trust spirit and whatever's meant in the space between us to lead us on a pathway of growth, however that means we remain in relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. And
Because I think the trust part also comes in around that concept of that it will show itself, right? Like when it's complete, or if it's complete, or where it's meant to shift, it will show itself, instead of trying to accelerate the process. And I think that happens a ton in relationships, is this desire for acceleration. Well, I want to get there. 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 Well, I have needs. I want to get there. I want to get there. And it's like, okay, great.
yeah.
I want to get there too. Don't get me wrong. I want to get there too, right? Like I so want to get there. Don't but I'm also pausing, right? I'm also pausing, and at the same time that I'm saying I want to get there, I'm not stifling that desire. I'm holding that and I'm allowing that to grow, and I'm not letting that distract me from the presence of what I am in and where I am now. So that gets to be this beautiful magnet, right? Kind of pulling me forward, but not in a way that puts my blinders on with what is showing up in the present moment. And I think presence is a really, really huge catalyst for freedom in relationships, because as we are present with one another, we pick up on these energetic subtleties that you were talking about earlier. Like your partner can feel your energy, whether you're saying something all sweet and and cherry covered or not, and it's being able to be in and be open about the energy that is presenting in the space between you. So it could just be like, and that's one of the things that I've learned a lot in relationship is less conversation, more presence, just with the other person's energy. Because when we get into conversation, and don't get me wrong, conversation is beneficial. Like, we're humans, talk to each other, please. Because people can use this as an avoidance strategy easily,
Yeah.
as an
Yeah.
avoidance strategy.
Yeah.
And so it's not don't talk about things, but I think that what can happen, especially when people get into a lot of conflict, is it becomes this like narrative mind base or nervous system reactivity, like tit for tat kind of situation. And it's just like everybody's batting their stories back and forth. And instead, it's like there's always going to be an energy that exists under what you're talking about. There's always going to be an energy that fuels that. So, like, let's just be in presence with the energy, right? Like, I've done this so many times where it's just like, you know what? This conversation is no longer, nope. We are just going to sit in each other's presence. You can feel angry. I can feel sad. I can feel agitated, whatever. Let's just be in presence until the energy feels complete. That can come to centeredness. That can come to peace. And it's like you're still relying on one another, but energetically. And this is also when, even if you are in conversation, where you're taking longer pauses. Don't make it this rush to like, well, we have to complete this and we need to get to a solution and I want to know. Like, that's just anxiety. That's just, I want to finish this and check it off my list, right? And like just be done and get rid of it, where you're not really being present with what is. And instead it's like, okay, I just noticed a shift in your energy. What just occurred there? And like just being curious. I think you used something like this earlier, like this asking questions piece, like just being curious, not just about what they think, what they understand, what's on their minds, what's on their heart necessarily, but you're getting curious about the energetic sense you get from their field, regardless of what's coming out of their mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. You're attuning to them, like their being, what they're experiencing. And then I think that, I mean, you said so many things that I'm just like, oh my gosh, where do I start? But definitely I'll start with this one. I think that when we can tune in to the other person's experience and not make it about us, that's when we can go into a space of compassion and hear them out. And if they can lower their guard, they can also say, you know what, that was really hurtful for me to hear. Or like when you like a thing that's always been an issue in my relationship was claiming it in the past, was my tone. My tone. My boyfriend was just like, you are so disrespectful to me. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm like the sweetest. And he was like, no, like this, the way you talk to me. And I was like, can you? And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And it just blew my mind. But those are the things, right? Like, can you imagine if I'm speaking in a tone that's aggravating him? How on earth is he going to hear what I'm telling him if he cannot get past the tone? So if this is something that happens to you and you're listening right now, like, you can ask your partner, like, again, asking the questions and then sitting with what is, or just allowing yourself to be with it, because it's like, okay, how can I? And I like this mantra of like, help me see things differently. We were talking about religion earlier, but Laura, you and I, we've shifted our relationship with God, with spirit, with source, and we have a great relationship. I think you much better than I do, with God and life, universe, whatever you want to call it, if you're listening. And I think it's just a matter of like, show me how to see things differently. support me in this. Like, I'm willing to see things differently. Help me to see things differently. And things always shift. But if we're in our heads, if we're in our spaces like the whole time, and we're not even, you know, like I think it was in the last episode that I said, you know, asking questions like, how can I be a more loving partner? How can I be someone who is more expansive and less contracting in my relationships? You know, not just romantic, but in general, like with family members, with friends, because the truth is, when you shift, everything outside you shifts. And a lot of people are still waiting for other people to shift and then I'll change. I'll change when others change. But it's not so much that you're changing, it's almost like you're allowing your inner flowers to bloom. And that is the vibe. That is the shift. But in reality, it's not like a transformation or so much like a like, well, I guess it technically is a change, but it's almost like a metamorphosis process where it's like you're really just like, okay, you were a worm, and then you know, you got into you were a caterpillar, and then you got into a cocoon, and now you're a butterfly. It's always you. It's always you. You know, so you are just going through these phases and you're blooming inside out, and then again and again and again. And so I think that really, you know, going back to what you were saying, it's just slow down, slow down. And it is a paradox, but once you slow down, things speed up.
Yeah.
Receive your partner, receive the experience.
And receive the experience and the medicine that it has for you. Because the fact is, if this is showing up in your world, then there's also something in it for you. And that's one of the questions that I know you used to ask all the time, that I always used to ask as well, and which I still do from time to time, which is connecting with God and asking, like, whatever part of me is contributing to the creation of this situation or contributing to the current nature of this situation, I ask to either be made aware of or release this now. Because it's that invitation to consistently be sculpted into a more divine form, into a form that's more loving, into a form that is more receptive, more compassionate, and more present and aware of who you are and how you're operating. Right. And I think that when we can humble ourselves to that and recognize that there's always something in that for us, it obviously that's going to have a ripple effect. And that's where the trust piece comes in as well, where the trust piece
Mm-hmm.
comes in, which is really
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, the trusting in that it will happen for you. If it is a something that is burning inside you, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time.
Well, and I think that's also trusting your own signals, because even like you were talking about, the tone that you would speak to your partner, right? So it's like, okay, and then they're not going to be able to receive me. And, you know, me talking about this tit for tat piece earlier is one of the things that I will say is, when I'm really in tune with myself, is I can feel the build. I can feel the nervous system dance. I can feel the tension, and I'm not available for it because I know that no change happens from that space. And so when I feel that, it's being able to say, like, I'm not here for the nervous system dance, but I am here to be with you.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not here for the dance because it's just, that's not a game I play anymore, you know?
Yeah.
But I am
I
here to
get
be
it.
in presence with you, and I'm here to receive you, and I'm here to love you. And it's almost simplifying everything and coming back to that space of love. And that doesn't mean you're bypassing what needs to be kind of resolved or discussed, but it means that you're trusting that you're calling in the energy that is going to show them and you and the space between you what needs to transform from a place of gentle love, rather than forcing or fighting or pushing or convincing or proving. Right? Because I think that happens a lot, where we're trying to prove ourselves or try to like get our point across so our partner understands us. And it's like, well, do you understand yourself? Like,
Yeah.
how much do you understand yourself? Like, you know, and I think that we try to push that on somebody where it's like, you could probably understand a lot more of me if I shut my mouth and let you just feel the love that radiates from me just chilling
Mhm.
out.
Yeah. 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 I love that. And because you're letting that person be. And when you let someone be, it's like, I want to be around you all the time because I can be whoever I want to be. We don't have to be engaging in conversation, or I don't feel like I have to be someone or something to entertain you. I'm not responsible for that. So when we make ourselves responsible for our stuff and we give back, because what sometimes we take on responsibilities from our partners, we give back their, we give them back their responsibility. It's like there's so much more space, there's so much more freedom, because it's like you're there doing your thing, and then we have this like, and we have this connection, even though we're still, not like physically ingrained in each other. And there is a beauty of that. There's a time and a space for everything, and I think that that is something that's deeply undervalued in relationships
Very
you
much
know
so. And I think that that's where I've gotten stuck before in the past, which is, that I was really good at practicing this until my partner would then shift into a really like negative space emotionally. And there
Mm.
was a part of my energy that was not intentionally all the time, sometimes intentionally, but not intentionally, like, but just kind of trying to lighten things.
Mm.
Right. And I think that that's also where trust comes in, because it's okay, first of all, is this person requesting it? Second of
Mm.
all, is this something like, why do I desire to engage here? Is it so that I can make myself feel better? Is it so
Mm.
that I can keep myself in this space? Because I can actually choose to remain in this space without interacting in that one at all. And I get to trust and have faith that this person either knows exactly how to move this through or will in their own time, or knows exactly what resources to access to move through, including me if they want me to be that one of those resources, right?
Yeah.
But that, really offering them the sovereignty to do that. And that if they really can't get out of a space, again, trust that you're going to know when you're meant to know. Like, you're going to get to that point where it's like, okay, dude, it's been like 5 days. Like, what the hell, like, let's
Yeah.
let's just be in presence or whatever. But
Yeah.
but trust that you're going to know, and that you're going to come from a space of deep compassion and reverence for their own path and their
Yeah.
own time.
Yeah. And when you were, as you were speaking about this, because my emotional maturity in this area is quite recent. When you were saying all of these things, I was like, I was getting flashbacks of how I felt when things weren't okay, in my perspective. And what I was feeling was, I was feeling very anxious because I felt, there was this deep fear of abandonment. So
Mhm.
I wanted to know that everything was okay and that I wasn't going to be abandoned.
Right.
So I wanted things to get fixed quickly. And if I didn't get a moment to like quickly, like, let's fucking go, let's do this, then I would freak. And I would be like, okay, then it's over. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
because like, you're not going to abandon me first. I'm going to leave. So I'll be the one who leaves, and then I never get abandoned. So, I mean, this is a whole other like wormhole that we could go down. But I think that for those of you who are listening and are like, well, how do I do this? It feels like horrible. Like my heart is like broken. I feel so anxious, this and that. Then that's the sign that the nervous system regulation has to happen for you. And you need to take care of that so that you're not projecting all of that onto your partner. Because when you give them that space, when you give yourself that space, that's freedom. And then when you can do that for them too, as well, that's just an extension of the freedom.
It really is. And I'll give you another example before we close up here, which is like last night, like yesterday. I started getting a little funky. I wasn't feeling well. I had a little bit of a bug, so I just like wasn't feeling great. And then like later in the day, my mind started to go a little, because I had been like just resting more, and my mind started to go, because I was really feeling like ugh. And I had connected to spirit. I had moved with qigong. I had done this, that, and the other. Right? Called in energy healing, all the things. Pulled some cards, and I was like, goodness gracious. And then finally, I just voiced it to a loved one. And I was just like, you know what? I'm just frustrated and sad. And she's like, yeah, I feel that. I feel that from you. And literally that's all I needed to say was just to own it and say, I'm frustrated and sad. And I didn't need to go into the whole thing. And as soon as I said that, I was like, and she's like, you so beautifully connect to spirit and do this and do that and all these things. Sometimes you just need to be present with you. And I'm like, yeah. And that's the other piece. It's like, did I require that in order to get out of it? No. Did it assist my process? Yes. And so I'm sharing that because this doesn't mean we're not meant to be in co-regulation and in connection with other people and allow them to support us, right? And so it's knowing that when you start to get a little sticky, sometimes that is the thing, but it doesn't have to go into a big thing. Similarly to, my husband and I, the other night, both of us were kind of restless before bed, and it was just like, and I felt, and then I finally fell asleep. I finally fell asleep. And I think it was like 20 minutes later, he like put his hand on my back and I woke up and I was ready to kill him. I was like, oh my God, don't touch me. Like I finally fell asleep, right? And I knew right away, I wasn't agitated with him. There was just a lot of energy. It was the full moon. There was a lot going on with the kids, da 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 da. And I was just feeling this agitated energy that for whatever reason was stirring me up. And without connecting a narrative to it or getting pissy with him, it was like me just the next morning, I was like, dude, I was agitated last. Like just owning I was agitated without attaching a story to it. And he's like, yeah, I was kind of agitated too, And I think that's a really important lesson to share with you guys is like, you get to own, I feel X, which is going to release the shame. It's going to move the energy. It's going to heighten your awareness. It's going to allow you to be present with yourself. And it's going to take the responsibility off of the relationship and the other person to be in this defensive space around, justifying themselves or X, Y, or Z. It's just like, yeah, there's agitation in the air. That's it.
Yeah.
It'll move. It's an emotion. They all move.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I think that's like the biggest thing that I see with clients. It's like they're so afraid to go into the emotion and to just be with it. But sometimes, honestly, like you said, just saying, like, I feel pissed. I feel this. I feel that without like the story of like, but there's so many people that are suffering in the world. And who am I to feel this way? And it's like, oh my gosh, just feel it. Just feel it, because when we suppress it, when we deprive ourselves, that's even like a bigger
Or even
fish.
going into a big vent session. Sometimes I'm not saying venting is a completely awful thing.
Yeah.
I err on the side of not doing it much as the more and more that I grow.
Yeah. Same.
Because I do think that we can get into mind stories and get very attached and rile ourselves up. But I also think sometimes, people can be a sounding board for that. But I think it's not getting into kind of any narrative. It's just literally naming it as like, I'm frustrated and I'm just like, and just letting yourself have whatever tantrumy like thing needs to come up and then just being like, whoa, okay. And even when I vent sometimes, I'll vent and I'm like, okay, great. Thanks for listening. I'm complete. Like, I don't need feedback. I don't need to process this. I literally just needed to dump.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's powerful. It gets it out of the system and then you come back with a great story.
A great story. It's usually something we laugh about, right? I mean, you and I do this all the time. So, yeah, and that's the last thing I think I'll say here is that's one thing that we have felt in our relationship, Anna, is just this freedom to just be so raw, right? Like to just be so honestly raw and just like, this is where I am right now. And also trusting and knowing each other well enough to be like, yeah, you can be a complete hot mess one moment and the next moment be like, dude, I am taking on the world,
Yeah. Hours later.
Yes, absolutely. So
I shifted out of that. Now I'm back.
Yep.
So I've booked 3 more spots for my retreat and I got 3 one-on-one clients and I'm like, yeah, that's how it happens.
So thank you everyone. Like Anna said, we could probably talk about this for about 6 days, but we really appreciate you being part of this, and definitely leave us questions or comments in the description of this video, wherever you're watching this or listening to this, and we would be happy to connect with you. And I'm just so grateful for this space. I'm so grateful for this time we get together.
Me too. I love you so much.
I love you too. Have a good day, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye.